The party was coming to an end, and only a few of us remained. The owner of the house told us about a ghost she hadn't seen in years, and everyone's reaction was the same. Pure terror, because it had become painfully clear that many of us, without knowing it, had seen it that very night. Good evening, community. Welcome to another edition of Tales of the Night, where, as you already know, we have tried to gather the most macabre and terrifying stories that have reached us. That is why we ask that you be very respectful of the stories we are going to tell tonight. You never know when you will be the next protagonist, and you may need to take note of how other people have survived an encounter with the paranormal. So this is your last chance to look for other content. From this point on, there is no turning back. In seconds, we begin this episode of Tales of the Night. Hello, community. My name is Nadia, and I feel like I just experienced a glitch in reality. Or at least that's what I think. I am completely stunned, but I want you to be the judges, to help me make sense of what I lived through. I live on a small ranch where there are only 4 houses. Naturally, all the neighbors know each other and get along well. We are out in the middle of the countryside, so it didn't surprise me that when I was returning from the pharmacy in the nearest town, I came across a grain truck right in front of my vehicle. I curse my luck, because those agricultural trucks, being so heavy, move very slowly, 30 kilometers per hour at most. And with no way to pass it due to the curves in the road, I was going to have to follow it the entire way. The drive home was going to take a long time, and my baby was already desperate to get to sleep. I had no choice but to be patient, drive slowly, and wait. Suddenly, I noticed another car had pulled up behind me, and I recognized it immediately. Since we were moving so slowly, I had the chance to turn around and see it clearly. It was my neighbor's car, an elderly couple. The husband was driving and the wife was beside him, just as always. There was nothing to be done. We were all in the same boat, and it was going to take longer than usual to get home. Then, at last, we reached the turnoff for the dirt road that leads to our ranch. I turned onto it carefully, and my surprise came when I checked the rearview mirror and saw that my neighbors had driven straight past. I couldn't understand what they could possibly be going to find out that way, toward the mountain, but I figured they must have had some errand to run. But here is where things get strange. Community. Because when I arrived and parked my car, right in front of my house was that white vehicle, parked outside, and through the window I could see my neighbors, the elderly couple quietly eating dinner in their kitchen, but I hadn't imagined things or mistaken them for someone else. I had just seen them on the road, that car with all its dents and its faded paint, and my neighbors, both of them, completely clearly. I know it might not seem like such a big deal, but I know I wasn't wrong, and I cannot explain what it was that I saw. My name is Arturo Vileda. This happened to me a few years ago on the border between Guatemala and El Salvador. At that time, I was already separated from the mother of my daughter, who was a year and a half old. I lived in the capital, and they lived on the border, in a village a few kilometers past Jalpatagua. This happened on a Tuesday, Children's Day, as it happens. I was working as a security manager at a shopping center in the capital. That day I received my paycheck, plus 2 bonuses they gave me for basically keeping everything in order and meeting my targets. I had planned to go on Saturday to visit my daughter so I could be back home by early Monday morning and make it to work on time. So when I left that Tuesday at the start of my days off, I stopped by a toy store to buy her a stuffed animal over 1 meter tall, shoes, clothes, and all kinds of little things. Later I went home, my parents' house, where I was still living at the time. I greeted my mother and showed her everything I had bought. I told her about my plan to go see my daughter on Saturday. We were in the middle of that conversation when the little girls from next door arrived. 5 and 3 years old, daughters of a family with very little means. When I saw those little eyes lighting up at the sight of the toys I had bought, I thought, What if my daughter is somewhere right now watching someone else receive gifts? What if she's watching someone else be shown affection, looking on with those same longing eyes? That was when I said to myself, no, it's nonsense to wait until Saturday. Right then and there, at 9:30 in the morning, I told my mother to make me something to eat so it would be ready by the time I got out of the shower. I had to leave. 20 minutes later, I was already starting the car to go see my daughter. But to my misfortune, it wouldn't start. Clearly, that wasn't going to stop me, so I took the bus that would take me to the highway toward El Salvador, where I would wait for another one going to Jutiapa. Look, I think the more of a rush you're in, the more obstacles get thrown in your way. After failing to find buses and having to hitch rides, lugging bags full of all kinds of things, it was around 10 at night by the time I finally arrived at Las Bielas, hanging off the side of a battered little bus, but there at last. I arrived and got to hand over the gifts and play for a little while with my daughter. Before I knew it, it was midnight, and that was when things started getting difficult. First, my phone had no charge, because my baby's grandmother doesn't like me and wouldn't let me plug it in. Second, I had to be at work by 7 the next morning, so I couldn't stay and sleep over. And besides, there was nowhere for me to sleep anyway. I thought to myself, well, nothing for it. Time to start walking. And so I set off on my journey to reach the road where the first bus passed at 3 in the morning. On the outskirts of the village, there was a small shop still open. I bought a cheap little flashlight, practically a toy, for 3 quetzales, to light my way, because there isn't a single streetlight out there. I walked and walked and walked. That was when I started to feel something strange in the air around me. On top of everything, the rain was coming down in sheets, and with every crack of thunder I caught sight of shadows standing along the edges of the road. I imagined them with glowing red eyes, like burning embers. But honestly, my nerves were already shot, and I told myself I was just imagining things. But I couldn't stop, and I couldn't turn back. My unease eased a little when I spotted 2 streetlights in the distance. That meant I was approaching a place called El Tempisque, a hamlet before you reach the Pulula River. I was halfway there, but in the distance, at the base of one of those posts, there was a large boulder. It had always been there. I knew it well. What had not always been there was the woman and the child, a boy of about 4 years old sitting on it. At first I tried to convince myself that there was nothing strange about it, that maybe they were waiting for someone. But I quickly lost faith in that idea when I thought, what woman would be out at that hour in the pouring rain, with her child, in the middle of the night? And it may also have helped that a powerful smell of decomposition was growing stronger with every step I took. I got within about 3 meters of them. I couldn't bring myself to look at her directly. I wanted to, God knows, but she never turned her face toward me. I could only see them out of the corner of my eye. Both of them were pale, their skin wrinkled and swollen, the way it looks when someone has been submerged in water for a long time. That's how they looked. They were hunched over, and the veins in their necks were visibly distended, in spite of, or rather because of, a gash that ran all the way across each of their throats. I swear to you, something was seeping from those wounds. It wasn't blood. It was a thick black liquid, like melted tar. I have never been a very religious man, but in that moment, every prayer from my catechism came back to me all at once. And really, God, what would any of you have done? I prayed and prayed, not to stop seeing what I was seeing, but to get the strength back into my body, because I could barely move it anymore. Every step was harder than the last. It felt like I was growing heavier and heavier, until I realized that hanging from my shoulders were the 2 legs of the child. He weighed more than a sack of cement, I swear it. I could no longer move, and the woman walked beside me and began to cry, but in the most horrifying way, wailing and gurgling as though her throat had been cut through the part she breathed from, and the liquid pouring out of her in torrents wouldn't let her cry out properly. That was when I truly felt myself slipping. I felt fear. Deep, overwhelming fear. And I simply accepted whatever was about to happen to me. I surrendered to the weight, not only on my back, but in my soul. I fell to my knees. I remember clearly saying to myself, if this is my hour, then this is my hour. Only please, watch over my daughter, and please let them find my body so my mother doesn't suffer too much. And when I said that wretched woman beside me began to laugh, to cackle. There I was on my knees, with my eyes shut tight and my heart clenched, when I felt a breeze unlike any I had ever felt before, warm and light, like the kind of wind that reaches you at the coast. But I didn't open my eyes. I just kept praying the prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel that I knew by heart, and I kept at it for about 10 minutes, until I felt my strength returning, a deep, profound peace that I have no idea how to put into words. Do you remember when I mentioned I was still before the Pulula River, that I was only halfway there? Well, when I opened my eyes, I was no longer there. I was still on my knees, but I was right at the spot where my bus would pick me up, at the entrance to the village of El Coco. Years have passed, and even now, whenever I think about it, I break into a cold sweat all over again. I never found out what it was I had seen, or how I had gone from that spot before the river to the stop I had been heading toward. I can't attribute it to alcohol or drugs, because those are vices I don't have. And even though I don't know how it happened, I do know what and who saved me that night. Good day, Uriel. My name is Sebastian Perez, and I send you my greetings from Barcelona, Catalonia. The experience I want to share with you is something that happened to both me and my best friend Jennifer in the year 2021. At that time, I was still living in my home country of El Salvador. I remembered this story because of the video about the macabre woman in the tree, and I'll explain why. You see, my best friend and I had a habit of staying outside our homes until the early hours of the morning, especially on weekends when we had time off from work. This happened on a Friday night. We were doing what we usually did, talking, laughing, and eating snacks and drinking soda, when at around 3 a.m. we heard a voice. I swear to you, when I heard the growl you mentioned in the story about the woman in the tree, I immediately remembered the deep voice we heard that night. It was a low, profound voice, identical to the one in the video, a voice that seemed to come out of the ground. My friend and I looked at each other trying to figure out where that voice had come from, because it seemed to be coming from about 10 meters above where we were standing, but with a very strange resonance, as though it was coming from below, from underground. My friend is very easily frightened by things like that, and I told her to calm down, that it was probably one of the neighbors trying to play a prank on us given the late hour we were out there. I walked toward where we had heard the voice, but everything was silent. There was no one around, not a single light on in the nearby houses. Even so, I kept to the idea that it might have been someone's prank. I went back to where my friend was waiting, and when I reached her, the same voice rang out again. And that same growl that you used in the video, that exact sound, was heard. What neither of us knew was that that voice had probably been warning us of what was coming. About half an hour later, we were still out there when we looked up. I swear I saw a group of 3 or 4 figures pass by. But the most terrifying thing wasn't seeing people walking around at 3:30 in the morning. It was that they seemed to be floating. They were figures with no feet. You could only see them from the torso up. From the waist down, there was nothing. I told my friend to turn around and look, and when she did, she was so frightened that we ran inside her house and waited until she had calmed down. In the direction those figures were heading, the direction they were floating toward, there was a ravine, and within minutes of them disappearing, a sound began to rise from that direction, like that of pigs being slaughtered. A terrifying sound, a shriek so loud and raw that, even now 4 years after it happened, I still have it burned into my memory. It was a horrible noise. My friend was shaken badly by the fright she got. The strange thing is that no one else seemed to hear it. No one came out of their houses. No lights turned on. It was as though the entire neighborhood was sleeping deeply, as if nothing were happening. Only a couple of dogs started barking after the shrieking stopped, and then there was complete silence. The following night, we considered staying out again until the early hours, but something strange made us change our minds. It started raining around midnight, so we decided to stay inside my friend's house. But when we stepped out onto the terrace, we saw that on the hill directly across from our neighborhood, there was a ball of fire resting on one of the high points of the hill. The strange thing was that despite the rain, the fire would not go out. On the contrary, it seemed to grow for a moment, and then return to its original size. Given what had happened the night before, I told my friend it would be better if I headed home. We couldn't risk getting involved with something we didn't understand, something we truly knew nothing about. We watched that ball of fire for almost 30 minutes, and despite the heavy rain, it never went out. I left for home, and according to what my friend told me afterward, that ball of fire remained visible until very late into the night. That was the strongest experience we lived through together. The most intense thing I went through on my own. I'll save for another email, and I think it's the hardest thing I've ever had to face. I send you my regards, Uriel, and if you ever publish this, I also send my greetings to the whole community. A big hug from Barcelona. My name is Katya, and this happened 3 years ago, at a Halloween party I was invited to by some friends from university. They weren't really my friends. They were friends of the boy I liked. I was still in my last year of high school and didn't go out much, but when he told me to come, that it was going to be a low-key party, I said yes. The party was in an old, enormous house in an older neighborhood of Puebla, the kind of house with high ceilings, thick walls, and wooden floors that creak with every step. I had always loved the sound of my footsteps in houses like that, and the way they smell, the way you can feel time in them. When I arrived, there were already a lot of people there. The house was decorated with orange lights and paper skulls, and music was playing everywhere. There was a bar with drinks and a crowd of people in costumes, most dressed as movie characters or that sort of thing. It was the first Halloween party I'd ever been to that looked like something out of a movie. I was dressed as a witch, but nothing too dramatic about it. Not a glamorous witch, just a witch. And in the middle of all those people and all that noise, something caught my eye. A child in the middle of the party, sitting on the last step of the spiral staircase that led up to the second floor. He was wearing a red costume and a plastic devil mask. He sat perfectly still, hands on his knees, sitting very upright. No one was talking to him. Since the downstairs bathroom was occupied, I went up the stairs to ask if there was another one on the second floor, assuming he lived there. "You can't go up. This isn't your house," he answered, very slowly. I had to lean in to hear him over the music from downstairs. The boy lifted his head slightly and stared at me without saying anything more. I could feel his deep gaze from behind the mask. I'm not sure why, but he gave me a very strange feeling. Not wanting to cause a problem, and sensing that there was something about him. I don't know how to explain it without sounding offensive, but you could tell he was not an ordinary child. I felt as though I had made a mistake by approaching him, without knowing quite what was wrong or how to handle it. I stepped away and went back to wait for the downstairs bathroom, because I couldn't bring myself to go up those stairs. Time passed. The party went on, but little by little people began to leave. By nearly 3 in the morning, there were only about 7 of us left. The owner of the house, her boyfriend, the boy I liked, and a few other friends. We sat down in the living room, and when we were making plans for a game to contact the dead, someone said to the owner, laughing, "Hey, but first the guard should go to bed, don't you think?" She laughed for a moment too, but then asked what he meant. "Your brother, right? He's been keeping guard all night." I said that, I chimed in. The girl turned serious and replied, My brother isn't here. He went on a trip with his boyfriend and his family. There was a silence, and someone asked, How old is your brother? 25, she answered. Then the one who had made the first comment asked again, So then, who is the child sitting on the stairs? The one who wouldn't let us go up? Everyone turned to look in that direction. I think all of us had tried to go up at some point during the night and had gotten the same response, but the staircase was empty. Only the faint light of a candle illuminated the steps. We all went together to check. Nobody wanted to separate. We climbed the first few steps, and the moment we did, a terrible smell hit us, damp and rotting flesh. The owner pressed her sleeve over her nose and said it was coming from upstairs, but that there was no one in the house. Someone joked that it was the ghost child, and she replied very seriously, No child appears here. She was quiet for a moment, and then continued, When I was a little girl,